Late August, 1944. A narrow road east of Metz, France. Hauptmann Klaus Bäke stood beside his Panzer Mark IV, watching smoke columns rise from German positions 3 kilometers behind him. But these weren't the result of American artillery. His own crews had set those fires. 8 perfectly functional tanks, their engines still warm, their ammunition racks still partially loaded, deliberately destroyed by their own commanders rather than risk capture. What appeared to be panic or dereliction of duty was actually calculated tactical thinking born from a reality German armoured forces had never anticipated. American 76mm equipped Shermans were advancing toward this position, and Panzer commanders had learned through bitter experience that these upgraded American tanks represented a threat their doctrine had never prepared them to face. The decision to destroy operational tanks rather than attempt withdrawal or defense marked a profound psychological shift in German armored warfare, one that revealed how thoroughly American industrial capacity and tactical adaptation had shattered Wehrmacht confidence. The story of why German tank commanders began burning their own vehicles begins not with military defeat, but with a crisis of expectation that German intelligence and tactical doctrine had failed to anticipate or adequately address. Throughout 1943 and into early 1944, German tank crews fighting in Western Europe operated under assumptions that experience in North Africa and on the Eastern Front had reinforced. German armour, particularly the Panther and Tiger tanks, possessed decisive advantages in firepower and protection that American and British tanks could not overcome frontally. This belief was not unfounded propaganda, but based on legitimate technical analysis. The Panther tank, officially designated Panzerkampfwagen 5 Panther, combined a powerful 75mm KWK 42L70 gun with heavily sloped armour. Its frontal glacis plate measured 80mm thick at 55 degrees of slope, creating an effective thickness of approximately 140mm that proved nearly impervious to standard Allied anti-tank weapons. The Panther's main gun could penetrate 138mm of armour at 1,000 meters using standard armour-piercing ammunition. Against the M4 Sherman's frontal armour of approximately 51mm on the hull and 76mm on the turret, this meant the Panther could reliably destroy American tanks at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, well beyond the effective range of Sherman main guns. German tactical doctrine emphasized this firepower and protection advantage. Panther crews were trained to engage enemy armor at maximum range, using their superior optics and gun performance to destroy opponents before they could close to ranges where return fire might pose a threat. This doctrine worked effectively against most Allied armour throughout 1943 and into the Normandy campaign of June 1944. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The standard American M4 Sherman tank that landed at Normandy in June 1944 mounted a 75mm M3 gun, a weapon adequate against most German medium tanks, but completely ineffective against Panther frontal armour. The 75mm M72 armour-piercing round could penetrate approximately 68mm of armour at 500 meters. Against the Panther's effective frontal armour thickness of 140mm, these rounds simply bounced off, leaving Sherman crews vulnerable to return fire from a tank that could destroy them from well over a kilometre away. American tank commanders quickly learned that engaging Panthers frontally was suicidal. Doctrine evolved through battlefield necessity. Sherman crews were trained to maneuver for flank shots, to use terrain for concealment, to coordinate with tank destroyers equipped with more powerful guns, and to call for artillery support rather than attempt direct engagement. This worked as a survival strategy, but left American armoured units psychologically and tactically on the defensive when facing German heavy armour. German intelligence throughout early 1944 tracked Allied tank development and production, but fundamentally misunderstood American industrial capacity and the speed with which American ordnance could respond to field problems. Reports noted that Americans were developing a 76mm tank gun, but German analysts, accustomed to their own slow development cycles and production constraints, did not anticipate how rapidly this weapon would reach combat units in meaningful quantities. The 76mm M1 gun represented a significant improvement in armor penetration capability compared to the 75mm weapon. Using standard M62 armor-piercing capped ammunition, the 76mm could penetrate 109mm of armor at 1,000 meters at 0 degrees obliquity. This was sufficient to defeat most German medium armor, including the Panzer IV and various assault guns, but still struggled against the Panther's sloped frontal plate. The first M4 Shermans mounting the 76mm gun arrived in Britain in April 1944, but American commanders, uncertain about the weapon's necessity and concerned about logistics and training, initially refused to deploy them at Normandy. This proved to be a severe miscalculation. By early July 1944, after a month of combat in the Norman bocage, complaints about the inadequacy of the 75mm gun reached the highest command levels. General Dwight Eisenhower's documented response and captured command frustration. "You mean our 76 won't knock these Panthers out? Why, I thought it was going to be the wonder gun of the war." On July 25, 1944, during Operation Cobra, the American breakout from Normandy, 102 M4 Shermans equipped with 76mm guns made their combat debut. German tank crews encountering these upgraded Shermans immediately recognized the improved threat but were not yet alarmed. The 76mm gun, while better than the 75, still could not reliably penetrate Panther frontal armor at typical combat ranges. German confidence in their armor protection remained largely intact through late July and into August 1944. Then American ordnance introduced ammunition that fundamentally altered the tactical calculation. The M93 high-velocity armor-piercing round, designated HVAP, represented a breakthrough in anti-armor technology. This specialized ammunition used a tungsten-carbide penetrator core, surrounded by a lightweight aluminum body and ballistic windshield. The design concentrated kinetic energy into an extremely dense, small-diameter penetrator while reducing overall projectile weight. The result was a dramatic increase in muzzle velocity and penetrating power. The M93 HVAP round achieved a muzzle velocity of 1,036 meters per second, compared to 792 meters per second for standard M62 ammunition. This 244 meter per second velocity increase translated directly into armor penetration capability. At 1,000 yards, approximately 914 meters, the HVAP round could penetrate 160 millimeters of armor at 10 degrees obliquity. Against the Panther's gun mantlet, which measured 100 millimeters thick on early models and 120 millimeters on later variants, this meant the 76mm Sherman could now achieve reliable frontal penetration at ranges up to 1,000 meters. The tactical implications were profound and immediate. Sherman crews equipped with HVAP ammunition no longer needed to attempt desperate flanking maneuvers or retreat when encountering Panthers. They could engage frontally with reasonable confidence of achieving kills at combat ranges. For German Panther crews, this represented a complete inversion of the tactical situation they had dominated for months. The first documented encounters between 76mm Shermans firing HVAP rounds and German Panthers occurred in mid-September 1944 during operations around Nancy and Aricourt in East France. The engagement reports from both sides reveal the psychological impact of this ammunition far exceeded its statistical battlefield performance. Lieutenant Merwin Plain of the 37th Tank Battalion described engaging a Panther at approximately 800 meters and watching his HVAP round penetrate the mantlet, causing an internal fire that forced the crew to abandon the vehicle. This was not an exceptional occurrence, but began happening with increasing frequency as HVAP ammunition reached frontline units. German after-action reports from Panther units in late September 1944 show a marked change in tone and tactical confidence. Commanders who had previously described engaging American armor with minimal concern now reported that American Shermans could achieve frontal kills and recommended increased caution and greater engagement ranges. The problem for German crews was that greater engagement ranges reduced hit probability, while closing to ensure hits meant entering the range at which American HVAP rounds could penetrate their armor. September 19, 1944, the Battle of Aracourt, demonstrated the new tactical reality with devastating clarity. The 5th Panzer Army launched a major counterattack aimed at disrupting American advances toward the German Axe border. This offensive employed approximately 286 tanks, including approximately 148 Panthers, representing one of the most concentrated German armoured efforts on the Western Front since Normandy. The 4th Armoured Division, equipped with a mix of 75mm and 76mm Shermans, met this attack with a combination of superior tactical positioning, overwhelming artillery support, and, critically, HVAP ammunition in sufficient quantities to make a difference. Over 6 days of intense fighting, German forces lost approximately 108 tanks and assault guns, many to Sherman fire at ranges German crews had considered safe. American losses totaled approximately 25 Shermans destroyed, a loss ratio that stunned German commanders accustomed to achieving far more favorable exchange rates against Allied armor. The psychological impact on German tank crews was immediate and profound. Panther crews who had operated with confidence for months, knowing their armor provided near immunity to frontal fire, now understood they could be penetrated and killed by weapons they had learned to dismiss as inadequate. This knowledge fundamentally altered tactical behavior in ways that extended far beyond the specific instances where HVAP rounds actually achieved penetrations. German tank commanders began reporting mechanical problems with greater frequency, requesting permission to withdraw vehicles for maintenance that might have previously continued operating. Crews became noticeably more cautious in their maneuvering, more hesitant to press attacks, more willing to break contact when encountering American armor. The rate at which German crews abandoned, damaged but potentially repairable tanks increased substantially. Tank commanders facing advancing American units began making calculations that would have seemed unthinkable months earlier. If withdrawal was uncertain, if American 76mm Shermans were approaching, was it better to attempt to save the vehicle or destroy it to prevent capture? The decision calculus had shifted. A Panther captured intact by American forces represented not just a loss of a single tank, but a propaganda victory, a source of intelligence about German capabilities and potentially, if shipped back to the United States, a tool for improving American anti-armor weapons. More immediately, captured Panthers were sometimes put into service by American units, creating the deeply unsettling possibility for German soldiers of being fired upon by their own equipment. Throughout late September and into October 1944, reports from multiple sectors of the Western Front documented German crews deliberately destroying their own vehicles rather than risk capture or be forced to abandon them during tactical withdrawals. Hauptmann Ernst Hoffmann, commanding a Panther company in 5th Panzer Army, described the decision in a post-war interview conducted by American military historians. "We received orders to withdraw during the night of September 27th. 3 of my tanks had minor mechanical problems, clutch slip, a damaged road wheel, an overheating engine. Under normal circumstances, we would have attempted recovery or repair, but we knew American tanks were advancing on our position. We had heard reports, confirmed reports, that their new ammunition could penetrate our frontal armor. The decision was simple. We could not allow these tanks to be captured intact. We removed ammunition, personal equipment, and operational components, then set thermite charges to destroy the engines and main guns." This account, one of dozens collected from German tank officers in the months following Germany's surrender, reveals the tactical logic behind what appeared to outside observers as wasteful destruction of valuable equipment. The thermite grenade, a standard piece of Wehrmacht demolition equipment, burned at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, sufficient to melt steel components and render vehicles completely inoperable. Crews were trained in proper placement of these charges to ensure maximum destruction of critical components, particularly the engine, transmission, and main gun. The process of destroying a tank properly required approximately 15 to 20 minutes, assuming no immediate enemy pressure. Crews would remove ammunition to prevent subsequent explosion hazards, extract valuable optical equipment and radio components for potential reuse, then place thermite grenades in the engine compartment, against the transmission housing, and ideally down the gun barrel, or against the breech mechanism. Detonation produced intense heat that warped metal beyond any possibility of repair and created spectacular fires visible for kilometers. These fires served multiple purposes beyond simple destruction. They marked positions that needed to be avoided by subsequent German units, prevented American forces from using captured vehicles, and created smoke screens that could provide concealment for withdrawing troops. The psychological impact on German morale, however, was uniformly negative. Soldiers watching their own tanks burn, knowing these were not casualties of enemy action but deliberate self-inflicted losses, understood viscerally that the tactical situation had deteriorated fundamentally. The scale of deliberate vehicle destruction by German armoured units during the autumn of 1944 remains difficult to quantify precisely, as units rarely documented these actions in official records that might have survived the war. However, American intelligence reports from this period noted with increasing frequency that German tank losses did not correlate directly with reported combat engagements. Vehicles were found burned and abandoned in positions that showed no evidence of combat damage, suggesting deliberate destruction rather than battlefield loss. A report from Third Army Intelligence dated October 8, 1944, observed that German units appeared to be destroying operational or minimally damaged vehicles during withdrawals at a rate significantly higher than observed in earlier campaigns. The report speculated, correctly, that fear of American armor penetration capabilities had altered German risk calculations regarding vehicle recovery and withdrawal procedures. The production of HVAP ammunition, while revolutionary in its tactical impact, remained severely constrained by material limitations throughout the war. Tungsten carbide, the critical component that gave HVAP its penetrating power, was a strategic material in desperately short supply. Each 76mm HVAP round required approximately 0.88 kilograms of tungsten carbide. American ordnance allocated this scarce ammunition carefully, with priority given to units facing the heaviest German armor concentrations. Most Sherman crews received only a handful of HVAP rounds, typically 6 to 12 rounds per tank, intended for use only against heavily armored targets that standard ammunition could not defeat. This scarcity meant that the psychological impact of HVAP far exceeded its statistical battlefield presence. German tank crews knew that American Shermans might be carrying HVAP ammunition, but had no way of determining which specific enemy tanks possessed these rounds or how many they carried. This uncertainty forced German commanders to assume worst-case scenarios, treating every 76mm Sherman as though it carried a full load of armor-defeating ammunition. The result was a form of psychological warfare, where the mere possibility of encountering HVAP rounds influenced tactical decisions far more frequently than the ammunition itself actually decided engagements. Panther crews became noticeably more cautious, engagement ranges increased where terrain permitted, and the aggressive tactical posture that had characterized German armor operations earlier in the war gave way to defensive caution. American intelligence officers interviewing German prisoners of war in late 1944 documented this psychological shift repeatedly. Obergefreiter Hans Schmidt, a Panther gunner captured near Metz in November 1944, described the changed tactical environment. In Russia, we engaged Soviet tanks with confidence. Their guns could not penetrate our frontal armor except at very close range. We could destroy them before they became a threat. In France, after September, we heard that American tanks now had ammunition that could kill us frontally. We did not know which tanks carried this ammunition or how much they had. Every engagement became uncertain. You could not simply rely on your armor anymore. This testimony, echoed by dozens of other German tankers, reveals how thoroughly the introduction of HVAP ammunition had undermined German tactical confidence, even among crews whose actual combat experience might not have involved encountering this ammunition directly. The broader strategic context of autumn 1944 amplified the psychological impact of improved American anti-armor capabilities. By September 1944, German forces on the Western Front faced overwhelming Allied material superiority across every category of military capability. Complete Allied air superiority meant German armoured movements during daylight hours invited devastating air attack. Allied artillery, supported by seemingly unlimited ammunition supplies, could saturate German positions with fire volumes German forces could not match. American logistics delivered fuel, ammunition, and replacement vehicles to frontline units with reliability German supply systems could not replicate. Within this context of comprehensive material inferiority, the Panther's armor protection had represented one of the few remaining German advantages. The realization that even this advantage had been partially negated by American ammunition development created a sense of tactical hopelessness among German armored forces that extended far beyond the specific battlefield impact of HVAP rounds. General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, commanding Panzer Lehr Division during operations in France, described the cumulative psychological effect in post-war debriefings. The technical superiority of individual German weapons no longer mattered when faced with such overwhelming material superiority in every other area. When even our armor advantage was reduced, it became clear that tactical skill alone could not compensate for such disadvantages. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The decision by German tank commanders to destroy their own vehicles rather than risk capture reflected this broader recognition of Germany's deteriorating strategic position. Every intact Panther captured by American forces represented equipment Germany could not replace in any time frame relevant to the war's outcome. German tank production in late 1944, while still substantial, could not keep pace with losses on multiple fronts. The Fatherland Tank Works at Nibelungenwerk in St. Valentin, Austria, the primary Panther production facility, manufactured approximately 385 Panthers monthly at peak production during mid-1944. This production rate, impressive by German standards, paled compared to American Sherman production, which exceeded 2,000 tanks monthly across multiple manufacturing facilities during the same period. More critically, German production faced increasingly severe material shortages, strategic bombing disruption, and transportation system collapse that prevented manufactured tanks from reaching frontline units efficiently. A Panther destroyed to prevent capture in France during September 1944 represented roughly 0.3% of monthly German tank production. From a purely numerical perspective, the loss was minimal. From a tactical and psychological perspective, however, each destroyed tank represented an admission that German forces could no longer hold positions or conduct withdrawals, with confidence that their equipment superiority would ensure success. The autumn of 1944 also saw increasing instances of German tank crews abandoning vehicles with mechanical problems that might previously have been field repairable. The combination of material shortages, reducing availability of spare parts, declining mechanical training among replacement crews, and increased psychological stress from facing overwhelming Allied material superiority created conditions where crews were more willing to classify vehicles as total losses rather than attempt time-consuming repairs while under pressure. American maintenance units examining abandoned German tanks frequently found vehicles with problems considered minor by American standards. A seized transmission that German crews abandoned might have been repaired in hours by Sherman crews trained in field maintenance and supplied with readily available replacement parts. A damaged road wheel that German forces lacked the time or parts to replace would have been a routine repair for American maintenance sections. This disparity in maintenance capability and logistics support meant that similar mechanical problems produced vastly different outcomes for German versus American armored units. The capture of intact or minimally damaged Panthers by American forces provided valuable intelligence that informed subsequent American tank development. Engineers examined German armor thickness, weld quality, and structural design. Ballistics specialists fired various American ammunition types against captured Panthers to verify penetration capabilities under controlled conditions. Automotive. Engineers analyzed the Maybach engine and transmission systems, documenting their complexity and maintenance requirements. These examinations confirmed what battlefield experience had already demonstrated. German tanks possessed sophisticated engineering and impressive individual specifications, but their complexity made them difficult to maintain in field conditions and impossible to produce in quantities sufficient to offset Allied numerical superiority. The Panther's Maybach HL-230P30 engine, while powerful at 700 horsepower, required frequent maintenance by skilled mechanics and consumed enormous quantities of fuel. Its final drives, a persistent mechanical weakness, failed regularly under combat stress and required extensive disassembly to replace. American engineers noted these weaknesses in detailed technical reports and drew explicit comparisons to Sherman reliability. A November 1944 report from Aberdeen Proving Ground concluded that while the Panther possessed superior armor and firepower in direct comparison to the Sherman, its mechanical reliability and maintenance requirements made it less effective as an operational weapons system under sustained combat conditions. The report noted that availability rates for Panther units, the percentage of tanks actually operational at any given time, averaged between 60 and 70%, compared to 85 to 90% for Sherman units. This 20% difference in availability might seem modest, but in practical terms meant that a German Panther battalion with a paper strength of 76 tanks typically fielded 45 to 50 operational vehicles, while an American Sherman battalion with the same paper strength fielded 65 to 68 operational tanks. Over weeks of sustained operations, this reliability gap became decisive, as German units steadily lost combat power through mechanical attrition, while American units maintained their strength. The psychological burden on German tank crews extended beyond concerns about American ammunition capabilities, to encompass growing recognition that the industrial war had been lost months or years before the tactical battles they were still fighting. Crews destroying their own tanks to prevent capture understood implicitly that these vehicles could not be replaced, that Germany's industrial capacity was exhausted, and that continued resistance served only to delay inevitable defeat. This knowledge, rarely articulated explicitly but clearly present in the testimony of German veterans collected after the war, created a form of existential despair that undermined morale and tactical effectiveness. The contrast with American tank crews could not have been more stark. Sherman crews, even those who had faced Panthers and understood the technical limitations of their equipment, operated within a psychological framework of material abundance and ultimate confidence in victory. If their tank was destroyed, they knew replacements were readily available. If they expended ammunition, they knew resupply would arrive within days or even hours. If they suffered casualties, they knew replacement crews were being trained and would join the unit promptly. This confidence in the industrial and logistical system supporting them allowed American tank crews to take calculated tactical risks and maintain aggressive tactical postures, even when facing technically superior German equipment. The final months of 1944 saw this psychological disparity manifest in measurably different tactical behaviors. American armored units advanced aggressively, accepted combat at closer ranges, and pressed attacks even when facing opposition from technically superior German tanks. German armored units became increasingly defensive, sought to avoid engagement except under favorable circumstances, and withdrew more readily when pressed. The rate at which German crews abandoned vehicles during tactical withdrawals continued to increase through November and December 1944, reaching levels that alarmed German high command, but could not be effectively addressed, given the strategic situation. A directive from Oberkommando des Heers, the German Army High Command, dated December 3, 1944, explicitly ordered tank crews to make every possible effort to recover disabled vehicles, and prohibited the destruction of tanks, except in cases of absolute necessity, where capture was imminent and certain. The directive reflected command-level recognition that vehicle losses through abandonment and deliberate destruction had reached unsustainable levels. However, the directive had minimal practical effect, as frontline commanders understood better than distant headquarters the tactical realities they faced. The Ardennes Offensive, Germany's final major operation in the West, launched December 16, 1944, demonstrated both the continuing capabilities of German armoured forces when properly supplied and concentrated, and the fundamental limitations that material shortages and psychological factors imposed. The offensive employed approximately 600 tanks and assault guns, including substantial numbers of Panthers and the new King Tigers, representing nearly every operational armoured vehicle Germany could assemble on the Western Front. Initial successes in the first days of the offensive reflected the advantages of surprise, concentrated force, and operations during weather that neutralized Allied air superiority. However, as American forces recovered from initial shock and weather improved, allowing Allied air forces to operate, the offensive stalled and then collapsed. German tank losses during the Ardennes offensive exceeded 400 vehicles, many abandoned due to fuel shortages, as German logistics proved incapable of sustaining the rapid advance that operational plans required. American forces, examining the battlefield after German withdrawal, found dozens of Panthers and other German tanks abandoned intact or with only minor damage, destroyed by their own crews during the retreat. The pattern established in autumn 1944 of destroying vehicles to prevent capture continued, now driven more by fuel shortages and logistical collapse than by fear of American armor penetration. The final months of the war in Europe saw German armored forces contract steadily, losing vehicles to combat, mechanical failure, fuel shortages, and deliberate destruction in roughly equal proportions. By March 1945, German tank units existed primarily on paper, with actual operational strengths far below authorized levels and availability rates dropping below 50% for many formations. The psychological evolution of German tank crews from confident superiority in early 1943, through cautious defensiveness in autumn 1944 to near hopelessness by spring 1945, reflected the broader collapse of German military capability under overwhelming Allied material pressure. The introduction of HVAP ammunition and upgraded 76mm Shermans represented one component of this pressure, but its psychological impact far exceeded its direct battlefield contribution. German crews knew that American industrial capacity had overcome even their technical advantages in armor protection, leaving them with no remaining areas of clear superiority and no reasonable hope that the situation would improve. The legacy of this psychological transformation extended into the post-war period and influenced military thinking about armored warfare for decades. German officers who survived the war and later joined the West German Bundeswehr brought with them hard-earned lessons about the limitations of technical superiority without industrial capacity to support it. Bundeswehr armor doctrine during the Cold War explicitly emphasized reliability, maintainability, and logistics support as crucial elements of armored effectiveness, reflecting recognition that these factors had proven more decisive than armor thickness or gunpowder in World War II. The Leopard 1 main battle tank, developed by West Germany in the 1950s and entering service in 1965, embodied these lessons. The design deliberately sacrificed armor protection in favor of mobility, reliability, and ease of maintenance. The Leopard 1 could not withstand frontal hits from contemporary Soviet tank guns, but it could be maintained by conscript mechanics with minimal specialized training, operated reliably under varied conditions, and was produced efficiently enough that West Germany could afford to equip substantial armored forces while maintaining a peacetime economy. American armor doctrine similarly evolved from World War II experience, though drawing different conclusions from German planners. The emphasis on reliable mechanical systems and automotive excellence that had made the Sherman effective despite its technical limitations continued to influence American tank design. The M48 and M60 series tanks that equipped American armored forces through the Cold War prioritized reliability and ease of maintenance while steadily improving firepower and protection. The M1 Abrams tank, entering service in 1980, represented the culmination of these design principles. Its turbine engine, while mechanically sophisticated, provided extraordinary reliability and power density. Its fire control systems incorporated lessons learned about the importance of first-shot hit probability. Its ammunition included depleted uranium penetrators that served functionally the same role HVAP served in World War II, concentrating kinetic energy through dense projectiles to defeat armor that would otherwise be impervious. The Soviet Union and later Russia followed parallel paths in tank development, emphasizing reliability and ease of manufacture while steadily improving armor protection and firepower. Soviet designers, drawing on their own World War II experience with the T-34, understood that mechanical reliability and industrial producibility mattered as much as individual vehicle specifications. The T-54, T-55, T-62, and T-72 series tanks that equipped Soviet and Warsaw Pact forces prioritized these factors, creating vehicles that were individually less sophisticated than contemporary Western tanks but could be produced in enormous quantities and maintained under primitive field conditions. The fundamental lesson that all Cold War tank designers drew from World War II was that the best tank is the one that reaches the battlefield operational and completes its mission, not the one with the most impressive technical specifications. German Panthers possessed superior armor and firepower compared to Shermans, but their unreliability and maintenance demands made them less effective weapons systems in sustained operations. This pattern repeated across numerous weapon systems throughout World War II, with German forces consistently producing technically sophisticated equipment that could not be manufactured in sufficient quantities or maintained under field conditions. The decision by German tank commanders in autumn 1944 to burn their own tanks rather than risk capture represented recognition, conscious or otherwise, that this approach had failed. Every Panther destroyed to prevent capture was an admission that German industrial capacity could not support the equipment their tactical doctrine required. Every crew that abandoned a vehicle due to mechanical problems was evidence that German logistics could not sustain complex weapons systems in sustained combat. The psychological shift this represented, from confident reliance on technical superiority to desperate measures to prevent equipment capture, marked the moment when German armored forces acknowledged, if only implicitly, that they had lost not just specific battles, but the industrial war that ultimately decided World War II's outcome. The smoke columns rising from deliberately destroyed German tanks across France and Germany in late 1944 and early 1945 were funeral pyres for German confidence in technical superiority as a path to victory. September 19, 1944, when Lieutenant Merwin Plain's Sherman crew first engaged Panthers with HVAP ammunition at Aracourt, marked a genuine turning point in the psychological balance of armoured warfare on the Western Front. German crews, who had fought confidently behind their armour, learned that American tanks could pose a serious frontal threat. American crews who had felt outmatched gained meaningful confidence from knowing they possessed ammunition that could defeat Panthers under favourable circumstances. This shift in tactical psychology, enabled by tungsten-carbide ammunition produced in American factories and delivered through logistics networks German forces could not match, influenced every subsequent armoured engagement of the European war. The impact extended beyond the specific instances where HVAP rounds actually penetrated German armour to encompass the broader psychological effect of undermining German confidence while strengthening American tactical aggression. Hauptmann Klaus Bäke, standing beside his command Panzer east of Metz in late August 1944, watching his crews burn their own tanks, understood at some level that this moment represented more than a tactical withdrawal. It was an acknowledgement that German armour could no longer rely on technical superiority to offset Allied material advantages. The fires consuming those Panthers symbolized the end of German confidence in their armoured forces' ability to influence the war's outcome through tactical skill and technical excellence. The crews who set those fires, who watched their tanks burn knowing they could not be replaced, had learned the hardest lesson of modern warfare. Industrial capacity and logistics support matter more than individual weapon quality. Reliability counts more than specifications. The ability to sustain operations over weeks and months proves more decisive than technical advantages in isolated engagements. These lessons, purchased at terrible cost across battlefields throughout Europe, shaped military thinking for generations and continue influencing defense planning and weapons development into the present day. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.